I think it's important for women to have a voice in combating of climate change. I think women just generally bring a bit of balance to the conversation, and women are pretty pragmatic in seeking solutions. So I think we would be treading down the wrong path if we didn't include women in a very fundamental way. You know, women are impacted by climate change, given their role in the household. And yes, in some cases, you know, men are taking over some of those roles. But generally speaking, women are much more impacted and have got to mitigate those impacts for the family in a much more fundamental fashion. I mean, it's just really complex, you know, when women are working as well, coming home, you know, maybe don't have the light that they need, don't have the facilities that they need, and have got to deal with those in a very trying circumstances. So I think having that woman's voice really helps move the conversation to much more practical solutions. As far as climate leadership is concerned and women's involvement and discussions around jobs, I think we need to move away from this talk about jobs and really embody women's involvement in a much more ownership style. So start talking about ownership, women's ownership of the climate change space, of projects in the climate change space, as opposed to jobs. And I think maybe that's general for men as well, but I think much more so from a woman perspective, because women haven't really focused on ownership. It's a job mentality versus ownership mentality. And I think the SIF can make a big difference from a woman to women in general, especially if they start focusing on projects that can involve women and communities as well. So it's really important for women to have a different role. Women leadership in climate finance needs to be redefined, in my opinion. I think one has to have a look at how women's ownership of the climate finance space can be embodied, especially in some of the structures. And just to make myself clear, I think we need to differentiate between jobs and a more sustainable implementation of involvement. So ownership of businesses in the climate finance space are important. And we shouldn't also just focus on technology, because technology, it could be much wider than technology. You know, women are able to lead very fundamentally so. So they don't only have to have knowledge of the technology, but I think they must have ownership of leadership and bring in the technology and not necessarily own a technology job. As far as green technology jobs are concerned for women, I think there has to be a fundamental shift in the approach to education. And I guess women in that respect, as leaders of the household, possibly need to be educated to be able to educate their daughters on the importance of technology-related education. So perhaps we shouldn't only focus on the education itself, but who's going to inspire those girls, the young girls, to take up the challenge of technology leadership. So there's an element of mentoring. And if that mentoring isn't there, I think we're going to miss the boat. So either we have to focus on assisting the mothers out there to inspire their children, or we've got to introduce mentors into the space. And perhaps the SIF can have a look at something like that, right? What does mentoring do? How can mentoring be built in and mainstreamed into some of the SIF programs? So I think that would be very, very interesting, because there is a gap, and that gap definitely needs to be filled. So my experience on women climate leadership is that I was very honored to work with someone in the organization, Eskom, on the implementation of a project that was funded by SIF. And our working together meant a lot to me, and in some ways we mentored each other as far as the project was concerned and ensuring that implementation occurred. She's no longer with us, but there's a poem I'd like to read in her honor, and it kind of embodies women and what difference women can make. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read this. Let me put on my glasses. And it's called When Great Trees Fall, and it's by Maya Angelou. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder, lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly. Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words, unsaid, promises walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent on their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses, restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed, they existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. And that's a tribute to someone I worked with, a great woman, and her name was called Ayanda Nakedi. Thank you.